curiously, the few jokes that do exist have to do with this theme of collaboration of Jewish and non-Jewish lawyers. Anyway, it's possible that the animus against Jewish lawyers is codified in stories about shysters and ambulance chasers. There's a false etymology that links the term shyster to Jewish lawyers. Actually, it's a much older term. It's been around since long before the visible presence of Jews in American law. And the current campaigns to delegitimize trial lawyers and contingency fee lawyers actually never invoke the ethnic motif, but it's possible that some in the audience find sufficient cues to awaken older stereotypes there. But generally, there's an absence of animus against Jewish lawyers in the jokes, and I think that reflects wider public perceptions. Actually, somebody conveniently for my purpose conducted a survey in 2002, and they presented respondents with 8 statements about negative Jewish behavior. And Jews killed Christ, have too much influence on Wall Street, care only about themselves, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the statements, as I say, wonderfully for my purpose, was Jewish lawyers are more unscrupulous. Well, it elicited agreement from 14% of the respondents and disagreement from 76%. It was tied for the lowest score of the 8 statements that they tested. Just to give you an example, remember 14%, too much influence on Wall Street commanded 34% agreement. So among those who harbor hostile images of Jews, Jewish lawyers are just not a prominent part of their repertoire of grievances. The Jewish connection in the great surge of lawyer jokes is not from the now dried up stream of conniving claimant jokes, nor from extremely rare and almost entirely defunct jokes about Jewish lawyers. Instead, it's from the migration of large numbers of Jewish jokes that have been told about Jews, into the lawyer joke corpus. And now jokes generally don't belong to a single group. They tend to move around, get switched from one group to another. They can't be switched randomly. Some switches don't take and they disappear from view. Others flourish and may grow more prominent than the original topic. Jokes about Jews, for example, as devious and untrustworthy partners have been readily revamped into jokes about lawyers. The many Jewish jokes about extended and precarious chains of Talmudic reasoning has made a successful transition, even though you might think that they would fit with jokes about lawyers' peculiarities of discourse, but they don't. Many jokes you will have noticed are built around what's called the rule of 3. There are 3 nationalities or occupations or religions, and they're contrasted with one another. In those jokes built around the law of 3, the lawyer in the occupational triad easily replaces the Jew or the rabbi in the ethnic or religious triad. An excellent example is a story that I will tell you, because which I should also confess I think is the most interesting of all contemporary lawyer jokes. And it has to do with a very wealthy man who's on his deathbed, desperately ill. He summons to his bedside his 3 close advisors, his doctor, his priest, and his lawyer. And he says, look, I know they say you can't take it with you, but who knows? Suppose they're mistaken. I'd like to have something with me just in case. So I'm giving each of you an envelope. It has in it $100,000. And just in case, I want you to come to my funeral and put the envelope in the coffin. So if it turns out it's useful, I'll have a little something. So they each agree, and just sure enough, after a few weeks, the old guy dies. And at his funeral, each of the 3 can be seen slipping something into the coffin. After the burial, the 3 are walking away, and the doctor turns to the other 2 and says, you know, friends, he says, I have a confession to make. As you know, he says, at the hospital, we're desperate because of cutbacks in funding. Our CAT scan machine broke down. We haven't been able to get a new one. So I took $20,000 of our friend's money for a new CAT scan, and I put the rest in the coffin as he asked. At this, the priest says, well, he says, I too have a confession to make. As you know, our church is simply overwhelmed by the problem of the homeless. The needs keep increasing. We have nowhere to turn. So I took $50,000 for our homeless fund and put the rest in the coffin as our friend requested. Fixing his gaze on the other two, the lawyer says, I'm astonished, deeply disappointed you would treat so casually this solemn undertaking to our friend, and I want you to know that I placed in the coffin my personal check for the full $100,000. Well, now, this story in something like this form has been circulating since at least 1876, often, but not exclusively, as a joke about Jews. The first lawyer version appears in 1964, and only in the 1980s did lawyer versions begin to outnumber Jewish ones. So we see the lawyer here combining greed, formalism, manipulation, betrayal. The betrayal, of course, is done in good form, but the form is obviously employed to undermine the substance. The doctor and the priest, on the other hand, divert part of the money for unimpeachably good causes, but they're guilt-stricken and apologetic. The lawyer appropriates it all, and for himself rather than charitable purposes, but he makes no apologies. In fact, he reproaches them. So, in this check in the coffin, we see the lawyer replacing the Jew as the canny fellow using calculation, formality, and clever interpretation to undermine the shared understanding of others. Lawyer jokes like this one have a Jewish resonance, not because they're about Jewish lawyers or about Jews, but because in important respects, the Jew and the lawyer are the same figure. Canny, learned, calculating, set apart from the moral consensus of others, and able to examine its accepted understandings with a skeptical eye. And I must say I'm indebted for this to Jay Michelson here, whose wonderful work on this has led me in this direction. Anyway, so they're both canny figures, and I would say that students of jokes say there are groups about which dumb jokes are told. The Irish in Britain, the Poles in the United States, et cetera, et cetera. But there's also another kind of stereotypical joke figure in most societies that have jokes, and that's the canny group. The canny group, Jews and Scots throughout much of the world, in the US also New England Yankees, Catalans in Spain, Armenians in Greece, et cetera, et cetera.